Shelling across the front line in eastern Ukraine has intensified, killing 2 Ukrainian soldiers. There are reports that Russian-installed authorities in Donetsk and Luhansk ordered women, children and the elderly to evacuate for Russia. These areas were seized by Russian-backed forces back in 2014. There were also reportedly convoys of buses starting on Friday night. But men aged 18 to 55 were banned from leaving the Donetsk People's Republic. They were ordered to report to enlistment officers.
Обращаюсь ко всем мужчинам республики, способным держать в руках оружие. Встать на защиту своих семей, своих детей, жен, матерей.
With all of this, US President Joe Biden has said he's convinced that Vladimir Putin has decided to invade Ukraine. He says the Ukrainian capital is likely to be a central target.
We have reason to believe the Russian forces are planning to and intend to attack Ukraine in the coming week, in the coming days. We believe that they will target Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, a city of 2.8 million innocent people.
The United States claims that Russia is looking for any excuse to start hostilities. But Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says he doesn't expect Russia to openly invade Ukraine imminently. He did say, however, that they were taking steps towards escalating conflict, and he cited the shelling that was underway as he spoke to the media. There are now nearly 200,000 Russian troops on the Ukrainian border. They've been amassing for weeks now, and there's no sign they're backing down or leaving. Just on Saturday, Putin watched as there were military, ballistic and cruise missile drills. And the White House National Security Council says Russia is also to blame for cyber attacks in Ukraine this week. You have to worry with the likes of Kamala Harris, partly in charge of foreign policy in the United States. We know the US has ruled out fighting against Russia militarily in Ukraine, and they've only threatened economic sanctions. Like I said on this program last week, this is hardly going to be a big deterrent for Vladimir Putin.
Make no mistake, the imposition of these sweeping and coordinated measures will inflict great damage on those who must be held accountable.
Chinese President Xi Jinping can't be happy, meanwhile, that Putin's threat of war in Ukraine has pretty much overshadowed the Olympics. It is possible that Putin could have struck an agreement with Xi to wait until the Olympics were over before invading Ukraine. And that date, of course, is today, February 20. It comes as Russia is playing Finland in the ice hockey finals on Sunday. Joining me now to discuss this unfolding situation in Ukraine is author and former senior China analyst Paul Monk. Paul, great to have you with me this evening. What do you expect will happen in Ukraine in the coming days? And how soon do you think Vladimir Putin might invade Ukraine?
I think it's very important to distinguish, to the best of our ability, between Putin's rhetoric, which is a kind of information warfare and game of poker with the Western powers on the one hand, and what he's likely to do in, as they say, kinetic terms on the other. I would expect that he wants limited gains in the Ukraine, and that much of his rhetoric, for example, demanding that NATO withdraw its forces from Eastern Europe, not simply that it back away from the Ukraine, is to test the nerve of NATO. He's been seeking for quite some time to divide the EU and NATO and to divide Europe from the United States. This is part of that bigger game. And my expectation would be that he will try and, as we say in salami tactics, carve off bits of Ukraine and, to the best of his ability, if he wins the war of bluff, then exert greater sway over Kiev rather than try and take over the whole of Ukraine. That at least would be my expectation at the moment. And consequently, I would expect that he's not going to launch a major offensive or actually assault Kiev. It could be we're picking up signals that imply that that's possible, but there's a lot of subtleties going on, I think, in the gaming, the rhetoric in which Moscow is engaging.
In terms of whether the United States, NATO, Europe has done enough to prevent an incursion, do you think the threats of economic sanctions are strong enough? Do you think there should have been the threat of military action to try and deter Putin from taking any steps to invade Ukraine or parts of it?
It's difficult to make a judgment call because at the moment, Putin knows that NATO is in many ways in a bit of disarray in terms of military capability, unified will, strategic vision, and that the United States under Trump and Biden has been in a bit of a mess itself, and he's playing on that. I don't think that threatening war with Russia in the event of an invasion of Ukraine would necessarily have been a sound idea. It seems to me, with Ukraine as with Taiwan, what the signal really needs to be to Moscow and to Beijing is we don't think that it makes good sense for you to start a war. Not because we're going to go to war with you necessarily, but because the long-term costs to you of showing that you're uninhibited aggressors will be very high. And it'll only begin with sanctions. It will lead to the rest of us bandwagoning together and strengthening our capacity to resist any further move you make. And we won't accept the annexations that you undertake. That's the kind of message we need to send. Because it could be that in each of those cases, a war would not only be very costly for NATO in the case of Ukraine as things stand, but possibly not sustainable under present conditions. That's a hard truth to face, but it may be the case. So I think we're in a very, very delicate place because the dictators led by Xi and Putin have become over very recent years increasingly cocky and aggressive, and we haven't yet got our act together. We've only started down that road.
Yep, they have become very cocky and aggressive and have been escalating force in so many different ways on the Western world. And at the same time, we seem to be lacking Western leaders who are able to stand up to them properly. Paul Monk, really appreciate your insights this evening. Thank you very much for your time.